We've got the best of both worlds, Oz people.
Great Southern songs.
I left my heart to the sappers round K-San, and my soul was sold with my cigarettes to the black market man. I had to
That iconic introduction that you say, you know, captures you and freezes you in time almost any moment. This is something very interesting musically, that it's not a phrase that's repeated elsewhere in the song, certainly not in full, but underneath it is reinforced by this nice little steel string guitar that you can hear under the piano as well.
Yeah.
But what it does musically is establishes the kind of what we call the tonal centre, the tonic. It's like the grounding of the song. It's G major. And what it's doing is what in musical terms is called a line cliche. It's a stepwise walking down of the bass, and you can hear that semitone going down, like dum, dum.
And it's so obvious, isn't it? Yep.
Capturing you at a very bright, sort of higher pitch, settling back down at the end to the chord of D. In musical terms, it's actually the dominant of G major. That's the fifth chord in the key. It's a feeling of coming off this high, bringing us back to earth, capturing our attention.
Having captured your attention, the downward progression of the bass line anchors you in the moment, and then there's that tension, as you've just mentioned.
Normally from the fifth, you would go back, you'd resolve to the G, right? You'd go back to that bass kind of chord of G major. It's a natural resolution.
Yes.
He does something different here, which I think is really interesting. Instead, he pivots up to E minor, which is the sixth in the scale, and it's what's called the relative minor of the key.
Yep.
And it takes you into sort of more the sadder sounding.
I think your point about the
minor chord,
the minor chord, that's when the lyrics hit.
Yeah, that's right. The
lyrics hit, and at a higher pitch. I left my heart to the sappers round Khe-Sanh. At that point of ambiguity, in comes Jimmy Barnes with I left my heart around a sappers round Khe-Sanh.
Yeah.
Really powerful lyric at a powerful point. And on he goes to talk about, and my soul was sold with my cigarettes to the black market man. Right in the context of this first introductory bit of music.
He's diverted us away initially to soften that kind of, otherwise would be a sort of a happy sounding song, to take us into a slightly more reflective and somber sound.
I left my heart to the sappers round Khe-Sanh, and my soul was sold with my cigarettes to the black market.
I left my heart to the sappers round Khe-Sanh, and my soul was sold with my cigarettes to the black market man.
His soul. I left my soul. Some essence of him was left there. So he establishes all of a sudden this thing that he's back here, but he's not the man he once was, because he's left something very important back with the sappers around Khe-Sanh.
You know, he establishes right up front that the world has changed, I've changed.
Right, he's established the broad emotional context of where he's going.
Yeah.
All right? And your attention has been caught by the music and by those powerful lyrics straight away.
And notably that the title is there, as we said, just in that first set of lyrics, Khe-Sanh.
Yes. I left my heart to the sappers around Khe-Sanh.
And doesn't reappear, but it's...
There it is. So he's introduced the song in the first line of itself.
I had the Vietnam cold turkey from the ocean to the Silver City, and it's only other vets could understand.
Okay.
Well, that's really interesting, isn't it? Because there's this... I had the Vietnam cold turkey. Cold turkey is a withdrawal process, right? Addiction.
What's he addicted to?
Well, what is he addicted to? War creates incredible adrenaline, either through the tension, through the fear. Your body's switched on all the time. So he's addicted to whatever it is that war is evoking in his person. Your body's addicted to that. That's the basis of PTSD. It's your body's reacting automatically to this incredible adrenaline flow. Only other vets could understand that. Mm-hmm. It's such an intense, unique experience that really, who can he talk about with it or who can empathise with him? Other vets.
Yep.
And that gives it a power and uniqueness. He's explaining, I've gone through an amazing bloody experience. My body's like reacting to it. It's taken me ages to get off that or come down from it. And really, only other people that went through it can get that.
No one else.
No one else. You know, you go to a pub and talk to the average bloke. They're not going to understand what it's like going through the bombs and seeing your mates die and all the other stuff you may have seen. They're not going to get that. You need the solidarity of someone else that's done it.
But you're in an environment where, as we heard, even vets weren't even prepared to talk about the experience to others for a while.
So not only can he not talk about it because it's such a unique experience, the social environment is antithetical towards it.
Yeah.
Yeah? Only amplifying this sort of, I don't know, alienation or sense of being lost.
For non-Australians, the reference from the ocean to the Silver City being
the
Broken Hill, or
it could be Broken Hill. From the ocean to the Silver City, ocean being where he lands in Sydney or wherever. Broken Hill, very far inland.
I took the message from this, right?
Yeah,
which is itinerant lifestyle.
Yeah, in fact, now that you've mentioned it, that was all ambiguous to me, but the message that it went from X to Y did evoke transience and itinerance. Yes, I totally agree with that.
Musically, what we've seen there is we've gone back to that progression that we saw in the first verse, which is starting on the minor, the relative minor of the key, which gives it that reflection, that slight sadness and pathos.
About the long forgotten dark side guarantees, how there were no V-Day heroes in 1973, how we said in a city.
Now these lyrics I found particularly poignant when I heard it for the first few times. Long forgotten dockside guarantees. Being told that you're special and going overseas and, you're doing something amazing for the country, going off and defending us or whatever it might be. But when it comes back, it's all forgotten, which is a sense of betrayal. You must feel a sense of betrayal or some sense of very strong ambiguity if you confront that situation.
Yeah.
You left with everyone patting your back, you come back and nothing there. That's pretty powerful. The punchline is there were no V-Day heroes in 1973. V-Day, of course, means Victory Day, Second World War. You see remember those iconic images of people dancing in the streets.
The man with the hat.
The man with the hat, all of that, none of that. And
not celebrating their return.
No one's celebrating. Not only have they forgotten what they said when they left, but then no one's celebrating when they come back.
And this goes at the debate about some of the mythology of their return and whether or not they had parades, which they did, but there was a discussion about did they really benefit from the degree of parades that they should have and these sorts of questions. But dockside guarantees can be read in a couple of ways. Like there's at a very personal level, which is you're saying goodbye to your family, your loved one, your partner, your wife. Yeah. And I can imagine that in the sense of we'll be here when you return. I love you. We will, resume. There's a sort of guarantee that you would resume. In a wider reading of it is government, society, acceptance. Government might help you reintegrate into society. Is that like it's a dockside guarantee, though?
Dockside guarantee. And to be honest, I interpreted that in the latter sense that you've just described. Mm-hmm. Politicians, talking about how important it is and how wonderful it is that these guys are going off and so forth and so on. And, we'll look after you when you come back and yada, yada, yada. But that not happening. But I really take your point about the personal guarantees because later on, of course, he says he couldn't connect with an old friend.
Yeah, the next set of
lyrics.
Yeah.
So let's get to that. But go on.
Briefly on the music here, just to show that we're maintaining a slow instrumental build-up. It's no percussion at this point.
No.
Piano, some guitar, it's still reflective. It's a sense of us being told a story. And the piano, after coming on that really high level, that very bright notes, has come down the register and sort of establishing the song as we move more into the body of it, if you like, before the percussion comes in. One other thing is, of course, Ian Moss's great guitar work, but in this case, it's very different. There's a very sort of processed kind of chorus flanger guitar that you hear in the background, almost like a keyboard. But that's not in the
original recording from memory, is it?
No, it is, but it wasn't as prominent in the mix, I think. For a time, I thought it was it a keyboard? Was it something else? It does sound more like a keyboard than a guitar, building out the musical picture. A harmony. Resurfaces with the help of AI, and I've been trying to work out, like, I could hear it in the stereo, in the picture, in the mix, but I was what the is this another?
But it's an echoing that Barnes voice, his voice going up and down,
and transforming the guitar into a harmonic sense, not a melody or a lead line, a harmonic backing, but almost like counterpoint.
In a neurological sense, it's neuro-linguistic programming via music.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It's reinforcing, and
it's reinforcing,
and then so it's familiarity when you hear the actual lyric, the vocal.
Yep.
Sydney Harbor, I saw an old friend, but I couldn't kiss her. She was lying, and I was home to the lucky land.
So there's this guitar sitting under that particular line.
Yeah.
So sailed into Sydney Harbour, saw an old friend, but I couldn't kiss her. She was lined, and I was home to Lucky Land.
An old friend, but I couldn't kiss her. Link back to the Dockside Guarantees, perhaps. This sense of something really has changed. He's left his heart back with the Sappers around KC, he's come back a different man, to the point where he's an old friend, but he couldn't kiss her. And I recall first hearing that, finding that incredibly evocative. What the hell has happened to this guy? What's gone on that he can't kiss this old friend?
Yeah, well, she was lined. What does it mean?
What does it mean? Yeah.
By other people? By a new partner? By a crowd that he couldn't emotionally get to, physically get to?
Well, that's part of the ambiguity that made it so evocative, I guess. I wondered about that. I didn't know what it meant, to tell you the truth, but it added to this sense of what's going on here. It drew me in. It really drew me in.
Disconnect. You can't. Don Walker, please help us out. Lucky Land, we talked about a reference to Donald Horne's book, early 60s.
Yeah, from the early 60s.
Iconic book, The Lucky Country. An ironic reference, I think, about Australian exceptionalism, complacency in that book. Is this the same intent?
Run by B-grade people, this notion that we think we're great and we're lucky, but really it's a misapprehension.
Lucky Land, a
very clever play on
reference.
That. Yeah.
So perhaps maybe in both senses, like I was home to this lucky country, happy to be back, but at the same time, there's another side to that.
And, he's left his heart. Something's different, and he's seeing the place in a different way, isn't he?
So I really like the musical transition here and how this goes from this kind of reflective, it's got pathos, it's that sort of slight, sad, happy blend that he's achieved without any percussion, right? Yep. And then what is really fascinating about this song, and this is why you need moments like what I'm going to describe here, which is the bass suddenly comes in and steps from the G major chord to an F sharp, and there's a momentum into the next part of the lyrics, right?
I think that's a really important and powerful part of the song, because as I said earlier on, and as you alluded to, he's captured your attention with those beautiful light piano bits. He's continued capturing your attention with the descending bass, and there's part resolution, non-resolution, And here they hit you between the eyes with percussion, bass, and a rolling sense of country rock rhythm, right?
And when you hear it live, right, it's
It
like
just
bang,
it just
bang.
hits you absolutely, and it works so strongly. And again, it was one of the first things I remember about the song from a musical point of view. I was listening to this and I had amazing lyrics, and then bang, off it goes, right? And there's this driving rock song.
It's a necessary device in this way this song's composed, and I'm going to show that in subsequent parts of the analysis, which is that it's composed in as a single repetition of verse. There's no chorus.
Yep.
So how do you make a series of verses which fundamentally still have the same musical chords and makeup? How are you going to make that interesting for whatever 3 or 4 or 5 verses? You need to change dynamically through it.
Yes.
And I think probably a lot of people who haven't read that probably don't actually knowingly recognise that it is a song without a chorus until the end, where you get to kind of more an anthemic repetition of the last plane out of Sydney sort of motif. But they need to have change in instrumentation, in dynamics, to make it actually continue to be a point of change to the listener. Otherwise it can become monotonous. It's like, oh, here we go, another verse. So there's your drum and bass leading into the next section. Let's hear it in context.
Sydney Harbor, I saw no friend but I couldn't kiss her. She was lying and I was home to the lucky land. She was like so many more from that.
And as you said, the music has really driven off now. So now we're into, it's almost as if he's pushed off from Don Walker has pushed the song off from the shore, and they're moving into the river, and now they're hitting the mainstream, and off they go. And we're entering into the main part of the song, aren't we, I think? And it starts off with this amazing lyric. She was like so many more from that time on. Their lives were also empty until they found their chosen one. It's built on this notion that something really has changed, but he's making a statement, some sort of statement about the vacuousness of life, perhaps, of the people around him at the time. Their lives were empty until they achieved something that they all needed to aspire to. In this case, their chosen one, until they found someone.
There would have been a chosen one, but it implies somebody else doing the choosing, or an expectation of the society or the community you're in that there is a chosen one for you. Like, I'm getting that vibe of like, or the parents or the church or the authorities approve of this chosen one.
Well, it's got a very passive air to it, doesn't it? The way I interpreted that, it was a nod to the not so much cloistered, but the narrow worldview. There was a certain way of finding your partner. For women, it was like finding that prince,
The myth of
the one that's going to fulfill your life, the forever idea, till they found their chosen one. Often alluding to marriage, alluding to stability, and some analysis has taken that.
You're referring to that academic piece,
Mandy Dyson,
right? And this is 1990s, I think.
It was 92. She wrote that piece, and she's taking this, I guess, a gendered analysis of this, saying that this was the way women were perceived by men, perhaps. Mm-hmm. It's a very stereotypical view of women, and one could say, well, perhaps all men as well were happy to go into suburbia and do that, but I'm getting ahead of myself.
No, but I mean, I think that Don Walker capturing the social mood of the time, or the social. He's not venerating this or supporting it. He's just saying that this was what it was. This was the society he was returning to, right?
It was an observation. I view that as an observation.
Yeah. There's a danger in like coming 30 years later or 20 years later to a piece and judging it in terms of a certain frame
that's current now, that may not have been at all applicable back then.
Not saying it was appropriate or it was the right thing, but that was reality.
That was reality. That was the way it was perceived by Don Walker at the time.
Now, interestingly, you mentioned the idea that it might have started as a punk song, but you've also said a few times that you feel the essence of a country rock.
Yeah,
And the beat and vibe in it, and I think most people made that observation, right? I think it's interesting musically to have a listen to the drum and bass and the way that they lock in, how it contributes to that feeling, the sort of country feeling. So the drums is a sort of rock beat traditionally when you play it at a sort of normal tempo. But actually the speed at which this is played is quite a difficult thing to achieve, that beat with the double bass drum that comes in, syncopated sort of double bass drum. But it takes on a country character as a result of that movement. And especially with the bass, double bass drum hits at the end of the bars and the syncopated bass line to match the drum notes. Right, 1 and 2 and 3. I'm going to play some other sort of country rocks excerpts and to see whether you can sort of hear the same pattern. So you ready, Frank? It's a bit of a test.
Very, very famously from the Eagles. A classic country rock motif with the double beat right at the end.
Boom, boom.
Yes, exactly.
Lion Eyes, second quiz.
Creedence Clearwater.
You would have been going around that time.
Creedence Clearwater Revival. Again, the double beat at the end. Bum bum.
Seen the Rain? Have you ever seen the Rain?
Have you ever seen the Rain?
Yeah.
That's right.
And that would have been just as the Beatles broke up. They had that moment, a year of great elevation, as if they were the next Beatles in the global charts.
Oh,
so,
for a moment they were huge. That's absolutely correct.
You would have been kicking around,
and
Wollongong here, and
they were very, very prominent. As you know, very eclectic taste in music, and I didn't mind Creedence Clearwater Revival.
Moving on, famous part of the song, which, as we alluded to earlier, may have led to Khe-Sanh not having initial airplay that it rightly deserved.
Their legs were often open, but their minds were always closed, and their hearts were held in fast suburban chains.
I'd probably say the most iconic lyrics in the song because they're so memorable. What can I say?
Does it get a cheer does this get like a roar, an extra reaction in the audience?
Look, I think it did. No one forgets those lyrics. They're so vivid. Hearts held in fast suburban chains.
Vast, not fast, sorry, vast.
They are vast. I've mentioned earlier on that it alludes to being somehow, particularly the chains, being somehow held back, being a prisoner, not being able to see the bigger picture. I think I alluded to the cave allegory. You know,
by Don Walker or by a bloke called Don Walker or someone more historical?
Well, actually, I think Don Walker's more of a protege, the guy I'm thinking about, which is Plato.
Ah, yeah.
It's 2,600 years ago. And look, the thing about allegories is they are so powerful, right? They force you to think out of the box about what something might mean. If you apply that thing about, are these people living like in a cave, and they're not seeing the real deal? And the chains alludes to that vast suburban chain. These are big constraints on them. What are they? Are they cultural? Are they economic? Are they social? But Don Walker himself says that the cultural ones are really important. It's really hard to break out of your culture. We're all embedded in the cultures that make us and that we make. In Australia, breaking out of the cultural milieux is a really difficult thing. So I think that's a really important and powerful lyric because it resonated with this notion of, certainly from the male perspective, and this is probably a mythological male thing, and what itinerancy, of being free, of being able to do what you want, and oh my God, I'm going to get tied down in suburbia. Now, that could be mythological as well because, most men were happy to do that.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But it is
maybe not somebody who's just been experiencing all the vices and the highs and the cold turkey experience coming out of the Vietnam environment.
Yeah, and the Vietnam environment, but it taps into this very old Australian motif of masculinity, I guess, going right back to the 1890s about the bushman, picking up the swag and walking around the country and not being beholden to a particular boss, but getting work where they can, having a swag and just camping out.
Old notions of
the whole
male.
notions of being free that way, not being tied down to some sort of dingy city office job.
So this is the bit where it's harder to decipher,
This is the
I
bit that
guess,
it's
but
tricky,
the
right?
legs were
The,
open, but the minds were closed. And from the academic paper we talked about in 1998,
Yeah, so I mean, if you took a strictly feminist critique that some might do, it's a negative portrayal of women. Being available for sex but otherwise stuck in the drudgery of domestic life, which was a perspective, held a particular feminist perspective. Now, as opposed to, say, the jaded Chinese princess that's available for all the male's whims, and so wasn't tying the male down.
later we hear about the hitting the mattress all night long.
Yeah,
And it's a comparison that's sort of awkward that I guess the Dyson paper is trying to, contrast those two depictions of women.
yeah,
right.
but it also reflects a certain male sexual fantasy, doesn't it?
It sounds a bit pejorative. Their legs were open, but their minds were closed. It's
It is pejorative.
probably wasn't the basis for why the song was banned back then, but just the reference to the sexual elements would have been.
At a stretch, you could also say that there's a hint of misogyny about it. It led to the song being banned, but why did those lyrics perhaps perceive it as being just too crude?
Crude, yeah.
And not hitting with the moral mores of the time?
No, it certainly wouldn't have been projecting a sort of feminist perspective of the depiction of women. There was more a basic kind of censorship that's a little bit unsavoury.
I'm sure it wasn't
You
censored because it was anti-feminist.
Yeah.
It was censored for other moralistic reasons.
All right.
And the legal pads were your hours-long pay packets lean. And the telex riders clattered where the gunships once had been.
And the legal pads were yellow, hours-long pay packets lean, and the telex riders clattered where the gunships once had been.
Well, how shit is work. How crap is work, right? Legal pads were yellow, hours long, pay packets lean, telex riders clattered where the gunships once had been. And this is classic work alienation, right? I think it reflects the fact that a lot of work is boring for a lot of people, and it doesn't fulfill them very much. But after the gunships, the incredible hype and adrenaline, well, not hype, but the adrenaline that would have gone for that. What substitutes it? Telex writer clatter. Not quite the same league, is it?
But
So
there's
it's a
two
letdown.
Oh, well, there's two things going on in here.
Two things you reckon? Yeah, go on.
Okay. So it's the drudgery of the office environment and the boring yellow legal pads working in the white-collar job after the kind of, not excitement, but the adrenaline of the, as you say, being out in the war environment. And it's part of that, but it's also where they clearly bring in a predominant theme, which is PTSD. Yes. So the telex writers are like in I Was Only 19, which we'll come to, where they reference the Channel 7 chopper, helicopter. These are triggering things from ordinary day life that are triggering potentially bad memories of the war.
Car parks make me jumpy, and I never stop the dreams of a growing need for speed and overcame.
So there, I think, there comes in that PTSD reference. having been with the gunships or whatever it may have been, car parks make him jumpy. The dreams, this continual playing in his mind of what was happening at the time, right? Of course, the drug addiction.
Yeah. Yeah,
Speed
that's
and
right.
Novocaine.
These are now we're getting more deeply into the symptoms of the
Exactly.
post the Vietnam experience. And recently, in watching some of the great American documentaries on the Vietnam War, Ken Burns' amazing piece of several years ago, it might have been that, but there was an anecdote of a vet who'd parked memories psychologically away, compartmentalized, completely took him by surprise one day playing golf, and might have like sliced off into the trees or the wilderness or whatever and headed in that direction. And immediately I think there was a log there in the bush, and immediately like, whoa, bang. He's like triggering this sort of panic recollection of like a person's body that he'd found stumbling into an area, on patrol. And like he hadn't thought about that for 20, 30 years. Yep. So it's that kind of like triggering potential of ordinary day events in life that people couldn't understand.
So I worked across the country from end to end, tried to find a place to settle down where my mixed up life would end.
One thing about the music at that point that I vividly recall was the entering of the harmonica. Harmonica was really evocative because it was a highly credible instrument in the rock genre of specialisation. It was used to great effect by really prominent artists, need I say Bob Dylan or, Neil Young. And in the country rock tradition, it's really quite prominent, the harmonica. And so for these guys to use it in an Australian context was, I remember saying, wow, that sounds fantastic, right? So just musically, it was really great to hear, and it's great variation to the usual country rock stuff of just guitars.
It's more blue,
and it's more bluesy.
It
Yes,
brings in a kind of like harder bluesy edge to it. That's, I think, and it starts to build variation and momentum in the song, and you're seeing it coming in later in a kind of call and answer sort of way. So we just heard. So I worked across the country from end to end. Tried to find a place to settle down where my mixed up life could mend.
Again, this notion of itinerancy occasioned by this experience, incredible experience of being overseas and leaving part of his heart somewhere else, and needing to mend.
Which is interesting that he's talking about settling down in order to mend, but at the same time we heard in previous lyrics that clearly he's incapable of settling down.
Yep.
And not being held in the chains.
Dude, this is one of the tensions in this song. He actually needs to mend. And there's a recognition of that. And maybe, some place he can find that solace.
Yeah. But otherwise he's just
traveling around, and that's not fulfilling in itself, right?
It's sort of like there's no real home between these two.
Yeah. These two states, right? He needs to resolve it. Needs to resolve it.
I held a job on an oil rig, flying choppers when I could, but the nightlife nearly drove me round the bend.
That sort of harmonica coming in again, calling is like answering the lyrics almost. Yep. He got a job on an oil rig, flying choppers when he could. Nightlife nearly drove me round the bend. That's ambiguous there, but again, more itinerancy, and the nightlife driving him around the bend. I don't know quite what to make of that. Is it that he just found it really
too quiet,
banal, and
they're sitting on an oil rig without parties, without I read that as, there's nothing happening here. I want to be out partying. I want to get back to hitting some mattress.
That's not the way I interpret it, right? Because they've got the word but. But the nightlife nearly drove me around the bend. So he's seeing nightlife, but it's not fulfilling.
Yeah, that's what I mean. There's not enough fulfillment in the
like
nightlife
I'm
that
sorry.
is there.
Yeah.
I mean, the Choppers gives him some adrenaline, right? You know, but then the nightlife is dead.
Yeah, okay.
think.
Yeah,
That's how
that's
I read
definitely
it.
one interpretation of it.
Another one I took was that a job that involved some risk that was kind of like return to that
A bit of an adrenaline rush.
adrenaline, right?
Yeah.
That's coming through in the, well, I'm flying choppers around and that kind of sense, right? It's the point earlier on about cold turkey, sort of struggling with the fact that he no longer has the risk and the danger.
Yeah, and to stretch the analogy, like he's trying to get his fix where he can.
That's it. It is. There's an addiction and a addiction theme throughout this, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And I've traveled around the world from year to year, and each one found me aimless. One more year, the world's aware.
And boy, is he getting tired of it. Year to year, travelled around the world from year to year. This has been going on for quite a while, and he's getting really sick of it, you know. And each one's found me aimless. One more year, the worse for wear. Like he's getting sick of this,
Yeah.
right? And it comes through in this sort of the wistful nature, because the song does have this sort of pathos about it, right? The pathos of the song.
Yeah.
He's aching, and by this time in the song, it's really coming through in those lyrics.
I alluded to the idea that it's a series of verses, right, that would change, but I wonder whether that construction contributes to this idea of the repetition, itinerant, because you're going back to the same motif and rhythm and structure.
Well, I was actually thinking as I was hearing it again that the driving rhythm of the song just keeps going and going and going, right? It's punctured by these powerful lyrics. They're not choruses, but they are real quite different points of inflection.
Yeah, and the harmonica and the instrumentation builds in parts to give you the sense of it's continuity with enough change to be interesting.
And each one found me aimless. One more year, the world's aware. And I've been back to Southeast Asia, and the answer sure ain't there. But I'm drifting north to check things out again.
What about the lyrics? I've been back to Southeast Asia and the answer sure ain't there, but I'm drifting north to check things out again. A lot of geography in this these lyrics, Frank. How do we decipher them?
Well, yeah, it's really the geographical references are pretty important, I reckon. I mean, he obviously he'd been to Southeast Asia for the war experience, but I recall when I was listening to this song for the first time, the reference to Southeast Asia was really important, not just for the fact that, you know, obviously Vietnam's in Southeast Asia, but also in the context of this guy's, you know, drifting around, trying to find the answer to things. At the time, going to Asia was also a thing about trying to find yourself, an interest in Eastern consciousness, Eastern philosophy. That was starting to pervade youth culture. Not starting to, it had been around for some time. And there was a link. There was just a sort of a mental link between going back to Southeast Asia and saying the answer sure ain't there. What he was looking for, who knows? But other people were going to Southeast Asia to explore.
Bali?
Bali, yeah.
It's a different category. It's not the
certainly
big-
the whole
it used to
hippie
be.
trail thing was started, had been around for a while. The line before it about each year found me aimless. One more year, the worse for wear. But this aimlessness then gets carried through to, you know, back to Southeast Asia. He's not satisfied with what he finds. Mm-hmm. But I'm drifting north to check things out again. And this drifting north is another, it evokes a thing, I think, amongst a lot of youth in certainly on the east coast of Australia, that going north was a thing. Going north was going up to Byron Bay, going up north to just hang out and surf.
Lismore,
Brisbane, Nimbin, maybe, you know, hopping in your car and just going north, right, as a way of just, you know, doing what you wanted to do and going north, escaping
city
from the
life,
everyday.
like escaping from the telex machines,
this drifting north to check things out again. But the expression "check things out" is a very familiar in Australia. Well, we're going to check it out.
Yeah,
man.
well,
we're going to check it out. We're going to go up north and just check it out.
More than that, like FM radio, mate. We're going to check out a bit of Chisel now.
Yeah, we're going to check out a bit of Chisel. Check this out, mate. Check it out. Right. So the word "check out" I really think just resonated in a very just ordinary, familiar way to listeners. It's a very familiar vernacular. Let's put it that way, right? And it resonated.
Check things out again.
So we're heading into an organ solo right next. We're going to hear a little bit of that. To me, it sounds like a Hammond organ. It's got a distinct style that was featured in like country rock bands like The Band. Yes. And there's this quite kind of screechy sounding slide guitar that sits under it. It's low in the mix that you can sort of bring up with AI and hear it a little bit more closely. And that's Ian Moss there. But also notably for me is the toms on the drums, really this really strong hit leading into the solo, and then you start to hear the ride cymbal, which gives it more sizzle, and an acoustic guitar, the sort of sound of the strumming on the steel strings is a bit harder. It resonates with some other, well, almost iconic organ solos. Yep. And I'm wondering whether that was, I mean, maybe inadvertently that was an influence, but particularly I'm thinking like Whiter Shade of Pale, Procol Harum, 1967, I think that is. It adds that sense of churning because the Hammond organ has this revolving speaker, right? Or it's kind of like churning, waving, drifting, reflection. I think it's really perfect for the song, and live you hear guitar solo, but it doesn't really work.
So I'd agree with that. The organ sound does have a real place in the rock history. It evokes. To me, it evokes other songs that typically are wistful, that typically reflective. The organ does that beautifully, I think. It's not something that's very common in rock music, in that popular genre, but it's there enough, and it's there in prominently in enough important songs that it hits that emotional tone. That's very evocative. The organ is so prominent. But the other thing that it brings to mind is when watching them on TV, playing that piece, the other thing that really sticks in my mind is noticing that Ian Moss was playing that piece as a slide guitar. And what he was using was a glass. He was using something that looked like a shot. It wasn't a shot glass, but it was a piece. It was a glass slide. A
glass slide rather than the metal slide.
Rather than metal slide, and that changed the sound.
Yeah, it's got a kind of quite a squeakiness, like a
squeakiness, but also a depth and warmth. And I was just mesmerised watching him play slide guitar with a glass. That was so strange, because usually when you play slide guitar, it was with a steel slide.
After this point of reflection in the song and a sort of wistfulness and a sense of drifting, I really think it adds to that theme of drifting north, you know. It adds to that sort of poetry. Then we have this real build-up that brings us to another point of change in the song. We've got the introduction of a really important lyrical motif, which is to organise the rest of the song. It feels to me like the way Hey Jude ends in terms of this sort of anthemic repetition, right? Not of a single word, but the idea that the last plane out of Sydney is almost gone. Does that bring together in some way and capture the whole essence of the song? I mean, there's many great lyrics as we've gone through, right? But What's that all about, and how do you think that works?
Look, I'd have to agree that I think that lyrically doesn't so much define it as it's one of the key, if not the key, motif that you remember about this song. Certainly in my
And when
case.
it hits the pub, what happens? When it's in the pub, if people are playing it and that
Well, at
gets
that
to
point,
that stage
particularly
of
when he
song,
says,
what happens?
well,
Well, the last plane out of Sydney's almost gone. And only 7 flying hours, and I'll be landing in Hong Kong.
the last plane out of Sydney's almost gone. You're back in the high zone of this song. Well, the last plane out of Sydney's almost gone, and only 7 flying hours I'll be landing in Hong Kong. Those 2 lines are evocative for me, or imply a whole bunch of things. The impression on me was that this guy had a certain sense of urgency. He just really wanted to go again. And my goodness, the last plane's almost gone. He better gets his act together. 7 hours in, he's going to be somewhere completely different
Yeah,
again.
and this time in Hong Kong.
And this time it's in Hong Kong, and he elaborates on that. I think that last plane out of Sydney was really important to this song, both for that reference to this guy who's drifting around, but also, as I've said before, because it's a local reference, Sydney,
Yeah.
and Sydney, and that really hit home with audiences, I believe.
Another song like that is Paul Kelly. Many Australians will understand this, but it's this reference, have you ever seen Sydney from a 747 at night or something, right? And it's
Yes.
just like, wow, okay, that's more that moment when you've been off on your long journey and your trail, and you've been in Europe and you've been backpacking, you're coming back in and like, thank goodness I'm on.
Well, he's coming at it from a completely
different
view,
angle,
isn't he?
yeah.
He's a guy that's relieved to be back. He's been around, but he's so pleased to be back, and that's referencing that sort of feeling, I think.
Well, the last plane out of Sydney's almost gone. And only 7 flying hours, and I'll be landing in Hong Kong. And there ain't nothing like the kisses from a cheated Chinese princess. I'm gonna hit some Hong Kong mattress all night long. Well, the last plane out of
Okay, so we move into and there ain't nothing like the kisses from a dirty Chinese princess. I'm going to hit some Hong Kong mattress all night long.
To any young bloke listening to this song for the first time, let's just say a whole bunch of thoughts and images would have come to mind, but there's a bit of a contrast, isn't it, to the vast suburban chains? Mm-hmm. Perhaps searching for something that's not chained down, something that's a little bit more free and loose, so to speak. Well, he's restless, and he perhaps is not looking for romance, he's just looking for a good time.
Yeah.
There's a whole bunch of interpretations around this one, but certainly that was there, this notion that it was non-committal, and it was great.
The academic paper that we talked about, Mandy Dyson, I think there might have been that contrast between the different images of women, the loyal wife in the suburbs, whose minds were closed and were happy to exist within that sort of bubble, and loyalty and I guess commitment, the idea of sort of finding your chosen one, commitment, with this, which is sort of to be free, to be enjoying the freedom of sexual experience.
And you'd have to say it's a stereotypical view of sex and women at the time, that men could do what they wanted. And here's a place where he could go and just do what he wanted,
Yeah.
He didn't have to worry about
He
what
could
she
hit it
felt.
all night long
He didn't care. And fantasise about the hitting a mattress all night long. It plays into male sexual fantasies.
Yeah.
And, I think that would have been important for half the audience. And it really helped it hit home in terms of its iconic status. It played to a certain element of male fantasy.
So it would have done okay down here at the Leagues.
I would think it would have
Club
done
or,
okay at most places it played.
Because maybe the experience at the Leagues Club, there's a bit of similar experience.
Well, yeah, I mean, like many clubs, the Friday and Saturday night scene was about having a good time.
Yeah,
let's just leave it at that.
Yeah,
and people did have a good time.
And keep it inside the bubble, Frank, as memoirs of a bouncer.
Look, what stays? What happened in Wollongong stays in Wollongong.
But the other thing notably here is how much guitar chords are really driving the rhythm.
It really reaches a crescendo. It reaches a crescendo musically. All the instruments are starting to pump together, and as you say, that harmonica really starts to leap out at that point.
It really forces its way into the...
And you can't ignore it, but all of them, the drums, as you say, the crescendo is so obvious and so great.
That's why I think it's a song without a chorus, but if you're looking for a chorus-type motif lyric, this almost achieves that. This repetition of the last plane out of Sydney builds the momentum each time we come around.
Sydney's almost gone. The last plane out of Sydney's almost gone. And it's really got me worried. I'm going nowhere and I'm in a hurry. The last plane out of Sydney's almost gone.
Well, there's the key I think you alluded to. I'm going nowhere and I'm in a hurry.
In a hurry.
Yeah.
And he's been like that for a while. He's been like that for, earlier on in the song, he says years. So he's been in this state, and there he goes again. He's really worried. He's really got me worried. I'm going nowhere and I'm in a hurry. That sense of ambiguity, of his emotional ambiguity about all this is really strong, and it brings the song together in a very strong way. Final lyric, the last plane out of Sydney is almost gone. Dang, and that's it.
And it ends on that unresolved.
On the unresolved.
Point, sort of lyrically,
Lyrically unresolved, musically almost.
Musically resolved, but lyrically unresolved. But you get this rapid snare drum fill as you enter into that, the last plane. I might play that again and listen out for that sort of building of the snare drum and the addition of the harmonica, and then the bass line. If you notice the bass line through the song, mostly it's sort of a pretty dum, half sort of notes, quarter notes or whatever. But noticeably in this section, he starts to fill in more incidental notes along the way, linking the bass. So you're getting on all fronts. You're sort of getting the harmonica really pushing and phrasing and responding, and drums really building.
Well, that's plane out of Sydney's almost gone. And only 7 flying hours, and I'll be landing in Hong Kong.
Harmony coming in over the top to add.
Yep. Out of Sydney's almost gone. The last plane out of Sydney's almost gone.
Harmonica. It is an iconic ending, isn't it?
And it's switching back and forth in that final moment between, I guess, is the dominant to the tonic. But it's got that kind of wavering again, back,
it's the wavering
forth,
between
back,
the two
forth,
between
and
the two forms,
and then kind of settling.
Yep.
We talked about iconic, but there's sort of that other word, anthemic, and I talked about Hey Jude as that anthemic ending part where it just goes into Hey Jude and repetition at the end, and na 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 theme, yep. And it just keeps coming back and round and hits it harder. And I see something here like that in the last plane out of Sydney, and it's just like coming round for another, pushing it harder, and by the end of it, you almost think that is the defining. You might be confused for thinking that's the title of the song.
It's really got me worried. Going nowhere and I'm in a hurry. The last plane out of Sydney's almost gone.
And what they call at the end is what the drummers call a flam.
Yeah, it's almost an emphatic underlining, an emphatic underlining, which really creates this amazing ending.
Great Southern Song.